Hi folks, this is Ariel Bruch out of SierraCast TV studio, and today we're going to talk about debt to income ratio and how it relates to borrowing money for buying a home, for home purchase. So the debt to income ratio is interesting, is one of the two most important thing that people need to know when they decide to buy a home or even to refinance a home. So it is what actually it implies. So it's the amount of debt the person has to pay regularly, monthly, to their monthly income. So that essentially by dividing one number by another number, you will come up with a debt to income ratio. So there are limits how much these ratios can be before somebody can borrow money. So typically for qualified mortgages, those limits are somewhere. And I should kind of step backwards and say, okay, well, there is a front end debt to income ratio and there is a back end debt to income ratio. The front end ratio is the relationship of mortgage payment, which would include so-called PITI payment, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, divided by monthly income. That's the front end debt to income ratio. The back end debt to income ratio is proposed mortgage payment, or if person has a multiple homes, will be multiple mortgage payments. For example, if he has mortgages on all of those properties. So mortgage payments and essentially all other obligations, credit cards, installment loans, student loans, any other payments could be even like, let's say if somebody has to pay alimonies, like all those monthly obligations, they will be included, divided by the income of the person, and that will be back end debt to income ratio, and those are extremely important. So for qualified mortgages that follow certain guidelines which allow banks and mortgage companies to sell those loans on the secondary market, essentially pack those mortgages into mortgage-backed securities and sell them on the secondary market. Those loans need to be essentially in compliance with what we call qualified mortgages, and and there are limits. So after 2008 financial meltdown and collapse, the banks and mortgage companies kind of come to consensus what really those limits should be. So essentially, people should not be over leveraged. If somebody has too much debt and they will struggle paying the loan, those loans will not qualify, will not fall into so-called qualified mortgage guidelines. So specifically, there is a institution called Fannie Mae, and they say, okay, so the front end ratio should be, debt to income ratio should be not more than 37.5%, and the back end ratio should be not more than 50%. The Federal Housing Administration says, okay, so I'll highlight it on the screen so you can see it. So the Federal Housing Administration says, okay, well, we are okay with people having front end debt to income ratio 44% or below, and the back end ratio not more than 50%. So there are always extenuating circumstances, and bank may take into consideration certain things. For example, some loans may be paid off within the next few months, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. So the bank will take that into consideration. So these are not set in stone, but typically if something falls outside of these guidelines, people will really need to have a good justification why they want this specific loan, because otherwise they'll just have a problem paying those debts. And there are reasons why they chose these numbers, these specific limits, both Fannie Mae and FHA, Federal Housing Administration. And those reasons are simply they look at statistics, they look at people who borrow money and they see who fails to pay and people who okay to pay, people who manage to pay the mortgage without falling behind on payments. So this is where those numbers come from. So in this specific video, I want to go over a case, a client I'm working with, somebody who was interested in this specific situation. A person was interested in buying a townhome in Massachusetts. So the purchase price was $275,000. He wanted to put less money down. He wanted to essentially look for kind of minimize the payments. The credit score was okay, but it was was, I would say, average. It was reasonable. It was around 700. Person wanted to put less money down and get best possible rate. It would be primary primary residence for that specific purchase. And the person said, okay, well, FHA loan seemed like fit their needs. And specifically why FHA loan for that borrower is that, as you're gonna see in a few minutes, is that the borrower had a lot of did not have enough income to really meet those debt to income ratios. And that's how this video come about, is that people really need to understand there are two main things that go into qualifying for a loan. Is that people need to have sufficient income, and they should not be over leveraged. So this is where those debt to income ratios come into play. And another thing is people need to have a decent credit score, so the bank see them as a reliable person who can pay loan, because these loans are typically 15-year loans, or most commonly 30-year loans. So the bank look backwards, they look for the last 2 years, or sometimes 3 years, and they want to see that the person had a history of making payments, person had a history which is consistent with underwriting guidelines. And the bank doesn't want to end up in a situation where somebody borrows the money and then several months later they stop paying on the mortgage, and then they mortgage defaults, and then the bank need to take the property back, and it's a lose situation for everybody. It's going to be ruined credit for the borrower, it's going to be a headache for the bank trying to dispose of the property. So everybody wants to avoid it, and this is how those qualifying mortgage rules come about. So I want to show you this specific borrower really didn't have any liabilities. All the monthly liabilities was essentially nothing. It was only less than $400. But then the income, that's in that specific situation, the borrower, he owns his own business, it's a cleaning business, and he makes some money, but he just doesn't make enough money for the kind of property he wants. Typically, the way bank look at this, the bank will look at last 2 years of tax returns. So in this case, it was a less than $20,000 tax return in 2018, less than $50,000 tax return self-employed income in 2019, and then the person still has a business operational in 2020. But the way bank look at this, they look at the file tax returns, and they also want to make sure business is up and running and operational right now, specifically in 2020, and then they will use those numbers to calculate those debt to income ratio. So what happened with this borrower is that this borrower actually needed additional income. This borrower needed a co-borrower to qualify for this specific purchase price, $275,000, with the property taxes of $3,600 roughly, and then the monthly payment of almost $2,100. So in this specific case, purchase price $275,000, taxes, annual property taxes $3,600, and the monthly payment, which is pretty significant, $2,100. So for that person to qualify for this specific purchase, he would need to add another co-borrower and have roughly another $2,200 in income. So the total monthly income is roughly $5,000. So then person can qualify for FHA loan, which has higher limits. So the front end debt to income ratio is, in this specific case, would be roughly 42%, and then the back end debt to income ratio would be under 50%, and then the person would qualify. So the reason why I'm showing you this in an example is that people need to be realistic. So there are two main things: debt to income ratio and the credit scores. And it's important for people to realize some properties, people may be just not able to buy certain property just because of the price range. And in this specific case, he didn't have much liabilities, but at the same time, he didn't have enough income to support this kind of payments. And the banks already know that's a high risk borrower for them if the person doesn't make enough money, like in this case. So hopefully you found this useful. If you have any questions, please reach out, let us know, comment below. You can reach me specifically at phone number 609-222-1222. Again, phone number 609-222-1222. You can call or send text message or leave a voicemail if I'm not available. And you can also reach my office I'm affiliated with, which is a Contour Mortgage. out of Robbinsville, New Jersey. You can find it on the Google Maps or also on the social media. So again, it's a Contour Mortgage out of Robbinsville, New Jersey. Thank you for your attention. Please leave comments. Let us know what other things you're interested in, and we'll be more than happy to research that specific subject. We'll be more than happy to maybe invite some visitors to our studio so we can kind of have a live discussion on different topics. So please feel free to reach out, comments, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.